In PHP, local variables are variables that are declared inside a function. These variables can only be used within that function and are not accessible from outside of it. In other words, their scope is limited to the block of code where they are defined. When the function starts running, PHP creates the local variable and assigns it a value. Once the function finishes executing, the variable is automatically destroyed and its value is lost. This means that every time the function is called, a new version of that local variable is created. Local variables are very useful because they help keep data isolated within a specific function. This prevents unexpected changes to variable values from other parts of the program, reducing errors and improving code organization. For example, if you declare a variable called count inside one function and another count inside a different function, both will exist independently. They will not affect each other even though they share the same name. This behavior is called local scope, and it helps programmers write cleaner and safer code. By keeping variables private to a function, developers can control how data is used and avoid conflicts with variables outside that function. In practice, PHP local variables are ideal for temporary calculations, loops, and data handling that only belong to a specific task within the program. In this code example, we can see how a local variable behaves inside a PHP function. The function is named test, and inside it, a variable 8x is declared and assigned the value 5. This variable ax has local scope, which means it only exists while the function test is running. Inside the function, the line echo variable x inside function is x, displays the value of x on the web page. When this line executes, the output will be variable x inside function is 5. After that, the function ends. At this point, PHP removes the local variable ax from memory because it was only needed inside that function. When the function test is called using the line test, PHP runs the code inside the function and shows the output mentioned above. However, the important part of this example is what happens next. After the function call, there is another line. Echo, variable x outside function is ax. This line tries to access the same variable ax, but this time outside the function where it was originally defined. Since ax was declared inside the function and has local scope, it cannot be accessed outside of it. As a result, PHP will generate an error message saying that the variable ax is undefined. This example clearly demonstrates that local variables in PHP are private to the function in which they are declared. They do not exist beyond that function's boundaries. Even if you use the same variable name in another function or in the main script, PHP will treat them as completely separate variables. Understanding this concept helps prevent accidental overwriting of values and makes your code cleaner and more predictable. It also encourages modular programming, meaning each function handles its own data independently without interfering with others. A local variable in PHP is temporary, limited to the function where it is created and destroyed automatically when the function ends. This concept ensures that your programs remain organized and error-free, especially when working on large projects with multiple functions or scripts. When the script runs, PHP first calls the function test. Inside that function, the local variable ax is created and given the value 5. While the function is executing, x lives only inside that function's memory frame. The echo statement inside the function prints an HTML paragraph saying, variable x inside function is 5. This confirms that ax is defined and readable inside the function. After the closing brace of test, the function ends and PHP discards its local variables. That means that x no longer exists. The next echo in the global script tries to use x again, but because ax was local to the function, PHP cannot find it. PHP then issues a runtime message such as warning, undefined variable ax in C, IXAMPOSHTDoc044P0 PHP on line 10. The exact file path and line number will match your environment and where the offending line sits in your file. This message is not just text you wrote. It's generated by PHP's error system to tell you that you referenced a variable name that has no value in the current scope. Right after the warning, your final echo still executes. If your code literally prints a label like variable x outside function is error, you'll see that phrase because you're explaining to the reader that an error occurred. The important lesson is that the outside echo cannot show a number for ex. The variable is undefined outside the function. This is the practical effect of local scope. The lifetime of x starts at the function's first line and ends at the function's last line, and its visibility never leaves that boundary. Two clean ways to avoid this warning are return a value from the function and use that returned value in the outer scope, or define a variable in the outer scope and pass it into the function as an argument. Using global x to pull a variable from the global scope is possible, but it reduces clarity and is discouraged for beginners. Returning values keeps your functions pure and your code predictable. In short, the output for this snippet perfectly demonstrates that local variables are temporary and private to their function, and trying to read them outside that function will trigger an undefined variable warning. In this script, AX is created outside any function. That makes it a global variable. Global variables live in the global scope, which is the top level of your PHP file. However, PHP does not automatically import globals into functions. Each function has its own local scope, and it cannot see global variables unless you explicitly allow it. So, when test tries to echo AX without any extra setup, PHP treats AX as undefined inside the function and raises a warning like undefined variable AX. This is why your demo text says that using AX inside the function will generate an error, even though AX clearly exists outside the function. From PHP's point of view, the function's scope is a separate box. Outside the function, the final echo works as expected. Variable x outside function is 5. That line runs in the global scope where AX is defined, so there's no problem. The contrast between the two outputs is intentional. It shows that scope boundaries matter more than where the variable was originally declared. If you really need to read a global variable inside a function, PHP gives you two mechanisms. The first is the global keyword. Inside test, you could write global AX before using it. That tells PHP to bind the function's IX name to the global AX. The second is the superglobal array globals, which stores all global variables by name. You can write echo globals to access it directly inside the function. Both approaches will make the function print 5 instead of producing an undefined variable warning. Even though this is possible, it's best practice to avoid relying on globals. Globals make code harder to test and reason about because any function can change shared state. The cleaner design is to pass values in and return values out. For example, define function show x, echo x, and call show xx, or compute something in the function and return the result to the caller. This keeps data flow explicit and prevents accidental side effects. Declaring OX in the global scope does not make it available inside functions by default. Functions have their own local scope. To use a global inside a function, you must opt in with global ALX or globals. Prefer passing arguments and returning results for clearer, safer PHP code. When the script starts, AX is defined in the global scope with the value 5. Then the function test runs. Inside that function, PHP looks for a local AX. Because the function has its own scope, it cannot automatically see the global EX, since no local EX exists. PHP reports, warning, undefined variable. At exe, on line 7, this warning appears before your custom message because PHP evaluates the echo statement inside the function and realizes AX is not defined in that scope. The demo line, variable x inside function is error, is simply your explanatory text showing that the function failed to access AX. Technically, the problem is not that x lacks a value globally, it's that the function's scope is isolated from the global scope by default. After the function finishes, execution returns to the global scope. The final echo outside the function prints. Variable x outside function is 5. This works because the outer code is running in the same scope where AX was declared. How to make it work inside the function, and what to prefer. Opt in to the global inside test. Add global AX. before using EXET. Now the function binds to the global AX and will print 5. Or use the superglobal inside test, write echo globals. This directly reads the global variable table. Both approaches remove the warning, but the best practice is to avoid globals. Pass values into functions and return results back out. For example, pop x or 5, function show value. Echo, inside function, value. Show value.x. Echo, outside function, x. This pattern keeps data flow explicit, prevents hidden dependencies, and makes your code easier to test and maintain. Global variables are created outside any function and live in the program's global scope, the top level of your script. Their lifetime starts when the script begins and ends when the script finishes. However, and this is the key point, functions do not automatically see global variables. Each function has its own local scope, so any variable name used inside a function is treated as local unless you explicitly opt in to the global one. To use a global variable inside a function, you have two explicit options. First, declare it with the global keyword at the top of the function, global x. This links the function's x name to the global x, letting you read or modify it. Second, access it through the special globals superglobal array, globals xent. Both approaches reference the single shared value living in global scope. Without one of these, attempting to echo OX inside the function will produce an undefined variable warning, even though X exists globally. Because globals are shared state, changes inside one function instantly affect the rest of the program. That can be convenient for quick demos, but it also introduces tight coupling and makes bugs harder to track. Any function can silently change a value another function relies on. For that reason, experienced PHP developers recommend minimizing globals. Prefer passing values into functions as parameters and returning results out of them. This keeps data flow explicit, improves testability, and avoids accidental overwrites. If you truly need a value that never changes and is used widely, consider a constant, const x, gerb10, or define x10, rather than a mutable global variable. A global variable is declared outside functions and exists for the whole script, but it's not visible inside functions by default. Use global name, or global's name to reach it, and use globals sparingly. This understanding explains why your inside echo shows an error until you opt in, while the outside echo prints the correct value. Here, the diagram shows a common scope pitfall. The variable AOX is created outside the function, so it belongs to the global scope. When you try to use echo LX inside test, PHP looks for a local X first. Because no local AX exists and PHP doesn't automatically import globals into functions, the function's AX is undefined and you get a warning. After the function ends, the statement echo LX in the global scope works correctly and prints 5 because it's running in the same scope where AX was declared. If you truly need to read or change a global variable from inside a function, you must opt in. One way is to place global tx at the top of the function, which binds the function's x name to the global x. Another way is to reference the superglobal array, globals, cow. Both approaches make the inside echo print 5. However, prefer a cleaner pattern. Pass values into functions as parameters and return results out. For example, function show value of echo show value x. This keeps data flow explicit, avoids accidental changes to shared state, and makes your code easier to test. 2 extra tips help avoid confusion. First, shadowing. If you declare AX inside the function, x or 100, it becomes a new local variable unrelated to the global AX. Changing it won't affect the global value. Second, if a value is meant to be read everywhere and never modified, consider a constant like constrate arbre 0.5. Constants are global by nature and safer than mutable globals. In short, the slide's no value inside, value 5 outside perfectly illustrates PHP's scope rules. Functions are isolated by default, and you should explicitly pass what they need. In PHP, a normal local variable inside a function is created when the function starts and destroyed when the function ends. Each new call gets a fresh copy. A static variable changes that lifetime. When you declare a variable with the keyword static inside a function, PHP keeps its value between calls to that function within the same script execution. The variable still has local scope. You can't use it outside the A function, but its lifetime is extended so it remembers what happened last time. Think of a static variable as a tiny memory bank tied to a specific function. The first time the function runs, PHP initializes the variable. On later calls, PHP does not reinitialize it. It reuses the stored value. This makes static variables perfect for tasks like counting how many times a function was called, catching an expensive computation after the first run, memoization, or tracking state in recursive functions without pushing extra parameters around. Static variables solve a common dilemma. I want a value to persist, but I don't want to expose it globally. With a static, you avoid the risks of global state. No other function can touch it, while still keeping continuity across calls. It's the best of both worlds: local visibility, extended lifetime. A few important rules keep them predictable. First, a static variable inside a function is initialized only once per script execution. Second, its value persists only during the request or script run. Web requests end, CLI scripts exit, so it doesn't carry over to the next page load. Third, in modern PHP, the initial value must be a constant expression. For example, a number, string, array literal, or constant, not the result of a function call at initialization time. Static variables are different from class static properties. A function-level static dolen is private to that function. A class static property like myClass. Count lives on the class itself and is accessible using the class name. It follows OP visibility rules. Don't confuse the two just because they share the word static. When should you avoid statics? If multiple parts of your code need to coordinate shared data, a proper object with class properties or a dependency you pass around is usually clearer. Also, for values you want to read everywhere but never mutate, a constant is safer than any variable, static or global. A PHP static variable keeps its value between function calls while remaining invisible outside that function. It's ideal for counters, memoization, and lightweight state inside a function. Use it when you need persistence without the downsides of globals. Inside the function static variable, two variables are created. The first is static $10. Because it's static, PHP initializes EOX to $10 only once, on the first time this function runs during the current request. After that, AX keeps its last value between calls. The second is $20. This is a normal local variable, so PHP recreates it from scratch every time the function runs, and then discards it when the function ends. Now look at the increments. On each call, the code does X++ and Y++. First call, X starts at 10 becomes 11. Y starts at 20 becomes 21. The echoes print, static 11 and non-static 21. Second call, X remembers the previous value 11, then increments to 12. Y is reinitialized to 20 and increments to 21 again. The echoes print, static 12 and non-static 21. This tiny example shows the core behavior. A static variable has local scope, you can't use X outside the function, but an extended lifetime. It persists across function calls. A non-static local has both local scope and a short lifetime. It's reset on every call. Two quick cautions for clarity. 1. The function name must be spelled the same every time you call it. Any typo will cause a fatal undefined function error. A function-level static persists only for the current script request. On the next page load or CLI run, it will start again from its initial value. Use statics for counters, memoization, or small bits of per-function state. Prefer parameters and return values for general data flow. When static variable runs the first time, PHP initializes static @x_10 once and keeps that value for the rest of the script. In the same call Y_20, is a normal local variable that lives only until the function returns. Both variables are then incremented. So on the first call, you see static 11 and non-static 21. On the second call, x remembers it was 11, increments to 12, and prints static 12. But do_y is recreated from scratch as 20 and increments to 21 again. So you see non-static 21. If you called the function a third time, you'd get static 13 and non-static 21. The static value keeps climbing. The non-static value always resets before it's printed. This behavior happens because a static variable combines local visibility with an extended lifetime. It's still invisible outside the function, but it doesn't get destroyed between calls. A normal local like do_i has both local visibility and a short lifetime, created at the start of each call and released at the end. Where is this useful? Counters as call tracking. Tally how many times a function ran. Memoization. Tiny caches. Store a computed result after the first call to avoid repeating work. Recursion helpers. Carry state across recursive steps without adding extra parameters. A few guardrails. The initial value of a static must be a constant expression, like 10, text, or an array literal. The value persists only for the current request. Each page load or CLI run starts fresh. And although you can reassign a static inside the function, it's best used for compact function local state. For broader, shared state, prefer passing parameters, returning values, or using class properties. So the output you're showing: static 11, non-static 21, then static 12, non-static 21, perfectly demonstrates the rule. Statics remember. Regular locals reset. Thank you for watching Huzaifa TV Official. Today you learned how scope controls the life and visibility of variables in PHP. A local variable exists only inside its function and disappears when the function ends. A global variable is created outside functions, but it isn't visible inside a function unless you explicitly use global name or global's name. And a static variable lives inside a function yet remembers its value between calls during the same request, perfect for counters and lightweight caching. Keep these rules in mind and your code will be cleaner, safer, and easier to debug. If this session helped you, please drop a comment with your questions, and share this video with a friend who's learning PHP. And if you haven't already, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss our next deep dive. Stay informed, stay inspired, and keep building. This is Huzaifa TV Official. See you in the next lesson.